Stephen, the two massive areas of human endeavor, science and religion, fascinate all of us. I've been thinking about it for decades. People think they're parallel in the sense that each have their own domain, but really they're very asymmetric. So if we start from the vantage point of religion and ask, what should religion think about science? How should religion talk to science?
I think what religion shouldn't do is to draw a veil, if you like, across reality and say, on this side of the veil, there's the natural, empirically observable world, and then on the other side of the veil, there's a kind of non-natural, supernatural realm which is not empirically observable. And scientists can make all the claims they like about what's on the observable side of the veil, but they shouldn't step over the boundary. They should recognise that there are limits to science. They should recognise that this is territory that is essentially off limits, and this is where all sorts of religious people, but New Age thinkers, people who believe in psychic powers or fairies, or those who believe in extraordinary and miraculous things, tend to place the phenomena in which they believe. And they say that because it's behind the veil, then science can't touch it. It's immune to scientific refutation, what I believe. And although I accept that there are questions that science can't answer, very probably, I don't buy this veil doctrine at all. It seems to me that that's just a smokescreen very often. When people make claims about the supernatural, very often those claims have empirically observable consequences. It's not just the supernatural that's unobservable, so is the distant past. So are tiny, unobservable subatomic particles. And yet scientists are able to confirm or refute claims about those tracts of reality, which are not observable. Why? Because we can, the claims have empirically observable consequences, which we can see, obtain or don't obtain. We can refute the claim. Similarly, if you believe in, say, an evil God, right, that is all-powerful and supremely evil, if you believe in such a God, you would expect the world on the observable side of the veil to look a certain way, right? It's not going to be too nice. It's not going to be too pleasant. It's going to be a living hell, surely. And yet when we look around us, we find love and laughter and rainbows and so on. So this then is excellent empirical evidence that there's no evil God behind the veil. We may not know what's behind the veil. We may not know why there's anything at all, but we know that whatever the answer is, it pretty certainly, almost certainly isn't an evil God. There's no evil God back there. And if you can say that about an evil God, then you can probably say it about various other God hypotheses too, such as that there's an all-powerful, all-good God behind the veil. Maybe there's enough evidence this side of the veil for us to be able to rule that out pretty conclusively.
Okay, let's look at this historically. Certainly there was a time in human history when religion would try to explain everything that existed. And as science developed with the Greeks and then beginning the Renaissance and continuing now, science has encroached more and more territory. And if all knowledge is this room, science is moving and painting religion into a corner, if you will. Now, the question is, how far can they paint? Can they paint the whole floor? Religion today would say that there are certain kinds of questions which are forever immune in principle from the scientific method. And that would say that if there is a supernatural realm or existence populated by God or New Age cosmic consciousness or whatever, that if you define that in terms of a non-physical stuff, then the physical approach to that stuff, the scientific method of experiment, repeatability, confirmability, and all of that may not apply. So you're using a technique that is designed for the physical world, which works enormously well, and requiring it artificially to apply to a different kind of world in which it's inappropriate.
I agree, certainly, that there are limits to what science can achieve. It seems to me that there probably are questions that are, in principle, unanswerable by science. And I think that the question, why is there anything at all? For example, if it is a legitimate question, which it may not be, but if it is, that's probably a question that science can't answer. Moral questions famously look very much as if they are questions to which science, certainly by itself, cannot provide us with answers. So I'm not wedded to scientism, the view that every legitimate question can be answered by science. That's not to say, however, that when people make claims about the unobserved and the supernatural, those claims aren't empirically accessible. So, I mean, if you just claim, oh, there's a transcendent something or other, well, I mean, that's a pretty hard claim to refute empirically, because it's difficult to know what it means even. But if you say there's a God that is all powerful and all evil, we can see immediately that, well, actually, what's on this side of the veil, as it were, the empirically observable world, should have a certain character. And if it doesn't have that character, that's powerful evidence against the evil God hypothesis. And personally, I wouldn't even call that a scientific argument, actually. Often people think that the only good arguments really are scientific arguments. If you haven't got a scientific argument, forget it. I'm not listening. But the thing about science, as the term tends to be used nowadays, is that it depends on the scientific method, a method which we've only had for 400 years or so. And people were providing very powerful and effective empirical refutations of beliefs long before science was developed. If I say, I've got a cat hidden up my shirt, you'll probably have a good old feel, and you'll find no lumps, and you'll hear no meows, and you'll draw the conclusion that very probably there ain't no cat up there, and that would be the reasonable thing, the conclusion to draw about this unobserved realm underneath my shirt. And so it's possible that there's a cat, maybe I've been breeding mute micro cats and there's one under my left armpit, but it's highly unlikely. So similarly, this unobservable portion of reality in which God and goblins and fairies and psychic powers are supposed to reside, we certainly can, by looking at this side of the veil, refute certain claims about what's on the other side. Not necessarily all of them, but very many of them. And you certainly shouldn't just assume that beliefs about God are immune. You can't just assume that. You need to come up with an argument. And that's something that people very rarely do. They just repeat the mantra, oh, there are more things in heaven and hell that are dreamt of in your philosophy, Mr. Clever Dick Scientist. Go away. This is beyond your remit. Well, no, actually not necessarily. The onus is on them to show why this belief actually is untouchable, if that's what they claim.